Everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shelley Dow, and I'm the Director of Organizational Development and Human Resources at MMUA. And I am thrilled that we have such a great turnout this morning. Obviously, this is something we are all watching. It's a big thing for us, for the state of Minnesota, to go to a paid leave program. And so really today, the purpose of this presentation is to give you an overview of the core components of the plan. We're going to talk about our role as employers in terms of what we have to do to get this to the implementation on January 1st of 2026. And we're also going to talk about some of the funding that goes along with the paid leave program. And then at the end, we will answer any questions that you have. There are some questions that I may not know the answer to. I am learning about it as much as you are. And there also may be some questions that there are no answers for at this point because the state is still continuing to issue guidance and do final rule making and with regard to the law. So we will do our best. Rita is managing the chat function this morning. So if you'd like to put any comments or questions out there, you certainly can do that. And we will answer questions at the end. And we will also be sending this deck out to you if you'd like to have it for reference so that you've got something to refer to from this point forward. Just know that things are changing and that I think the core components of this plan are in place, but there will be some changes along the way as well. So we are also recording. So if there are people here who registered but were unable to come today, we will make sure that you get a recording as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first thing I need to do is start with a disclaimer. And that is that all the material and what I'm talking about today is valid as of today, March 11th. And the reason I say that is because the state is still in the process of doing the final rulemaking for the paid leave plan. And there's been a potential wrinkle in the House in that there was a GOP bill, House File 11, that wanted to delay the paid leave plan from January 1, 2026 to January 1st of 2027. As of yesterday, that bill has been tabled on the House floor and did not get a vote. And so right now we're moving forward as if we're going to be implementing this plan on January 1st of 2026. Regardless of if it's delayed or not, the core components of the plan will be beneficial information to those of you, especially who are working in the HR related functions of your organizations, because those are pretty much in place. The implementation date, may go back and forth a little bit, but I think what you'll be able to gain today will be beneficial. So I just wanted to start with that since it's kind of hot off the press. I thought it might be helpful to start at a more general level and to answer the questions, what are paid leave insurance programs? How do they work and how are they funded and who pays the benefits? So paid leave programs are state mandatory programs that employers and employees cannot opt out of. They typically provide income replacement for employees who are out of work due to a leave. And many of them also provide some form of job protection. And that it really is dependent upon the state. How do they work? Most programs are based on that particular state's unemployment insurance program. And that's the same is true with the state of Minnesota. In certain states, employers can opt out of the state program and go with an individual insurance carrier as long as that carrier has been approved by the state and has equal to or greater than benefits under that leave law. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. The plans are typically funded by employer and employee contributions, and they are paid out by the state. So the entire claims process from start to finish to the time the employee gets a check, that is all done by the state. Or if you choose by the insurance carrier if you choose to go that route. This is a little different than what we experienced with Earn Sick and Save Time. And if you remember, about a year ago, we were together talking about that. This is different because it's administered and paid for by the state. So let's take a look at Minnesota's paid leave plan. The Minnesota paid leave law, which was enacted in May of 2023, it was updated again in May of 2024, and it makes paid family and medical leave coverage available to most all Minnesota workers on January 1st of 2026. The law in Minnesota provides both job protection and partial wage replacement. It's paid for by the state to individuals who take leave for a qualifying condition. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. The paid leave program in our state will be funded by premiums made up of contributions by both employees and employers. So let's take a look at the timeline. And what I really kind of want to focus in on is where we are in the process and where we need to go in the next several of months. So the bill was made into law on May 25th of 2023. There have been a couple different rules proposed for public comment. One was done earlier last year in 2024, and the last was done in November, and the comment period was completed in January of this year. Right now, the legislature is taking up those comments and doing the final rulemaking. So we don't even have yet the final rules with regard to the paid leave law. Those are expected to come out in spring of 2025, and I don't know what spring necessarily means, if that's going to be in the next month or the next couple of months, but we're waiting to get guidance from the state on what that will look like. In addition, spring of 2025 is another key date because this is when we as employers can apply for an equivalent plan exemption once those plans have been approved by the state. So for example, if you have an insurance plan with Unum or another insurance company and you want to see if they have a leave management plan that will work for the state of Minnesota, you can talk to your broker about that and get a quote. And then eventually, once we get guidance from the state, we'll be able to apply for that exemption so that our leave benefits then would be done through our insurance carrier and not the state. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides as well. But that guidance hasn't come yet. A couple other dates I want to throw out as important dates for you to remember. December 1st. December 1st is when we as employers need to notify our employees of paid leave. And we do that in two ways, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But that's kind of a key date. And then obviously the go live date for both benefits and for payroll deductions to begin is January 1 of 2026. The first quarterly dues will be due to the state on April 30th of 2026. So that's kind of the overall timeline for when, how this is all going to take place. As you can see, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and we still need to get a lot of guidance from the state as to the final rules and, you know, which companies have they approved for alternative plans as well. So Minnesota's leave plan is really broken into two different buckets, the medical leave and family leave. Medical leave is that an employee can take up to 12 weeks to care for him or herself because of a serious health condition. Keep in mind that these conditions have to be more than 7 days in duration and that they need to be certified by a healthcare professional. So that's pretty straightforward. The medical leave is pretty easy. Family leave, on the other hand, is a little bit more broad. And in the family leave, there are really 4 different kinds of leave that we need to be concerned about as employers. The first is that an employee can take up to 12 weeks to bond with a new child. And that's whether the child comes to them by birth, adoption, or foster care placement. So they can take 12 weeks to bond with a new child, and it has to happen within 12 months of the child's birth or placement. Second is caring leave. Caring leave is a leave to care for a family or loved one, again, with a serious health condition, and a certification will need to be, had for all of these different leave types. The third is a safety leave. Safety leave is because of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking for an employee or an employee's family member. And the fourth leave is an active duty leave. And that's a leave because a family member is on active duty or has been notified of an impending call to go to active duty by the armed forces. So again, 4 different types. With each one of these different types, there will be a different certification that will be required. And again, don't know that specifically. That will be coming down from the state in the coming weeks. I'm sure the different types of qualifications. And then keep in mind that when we talked about the definition of a family member, just like family leave is broad, the definition of a family member is also very broad. And if you remember with Earn Sick and Safe Time, we had that same really wide definition of family member that applies to this law as well. So a family member can be children, siblings, parents, grandparents, spouse, domestic partner, and then any version of that. It can also be a person that you have a close relationship with. Maybe it's a neighbor that you're caring for, something like that. But again, there has to be a certification process, and we're waiting on guidance from the state with regard to that. All right. What's interesting about this program is that an employee can take up to 12 weeks for medical leave and up to 12 and or up to 12 weeks for family leave. Keep in mind that the most they can take in a benefit year is 20 weeks. And so I think that was one of my major ahas when I started, researching this more and more, is that you could have a situation where an employee is out on a medical leave for 12 weeks, and then they have a situation where they're out on family leave for another 8 weeks. So they can't take 12 and 12, but they can take up to 20. And so that, that's a large chunk of the year, and it's just something to be aware of. Keep in mind that with each one of these leaves, there will be a certification process, and that the condition needs to be qualified for 7 or more days. Who is eligible under the plan? In terms of coverage, the program is I used the word broad before, I'm going to use it again. It's very broad. It covers almost all employers, regardless of their size, and it covers almost all employees. So for us, for benefits of all of us in our organizations, we're talking about full and part-time workers, seasonal workers, temporary and student workers, first responders, and elected and appointed officials. So it's pretty expansive in terms of who this paid leave program covers. Who is not covered? Independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and tribal nations are not covered under the paid leave plan in Minnesota. However, they can opt into coverage if they choose to do so. The only employee groups who are not covered and cannot opt in are federal employees, railroad employees, and exempt seasonal employees in the hospitality industry. So you can see that it is fairly broad in terms of who this program is going to cover. Another concept to know with regard to our law here in Minnesota is a term called localization. Because this is a state program, it only covers Minnesota employees. And the way our law defines a Minnesota employee is through a process called a localization test. The test has 2 parts. First, an employee must perform 50% or more of their work in the state of Minnesota. If they do, they are covered by the paid leave plan. Second, for employees who do not work 50% of their time in Minnesota, it matters where they live. So for most of us, this will not apply, but I want to make sure to go over it because I think it's important for those of us who are kind of on the borders of the state. So for example, if you have an employee who works a third of the time in Wisconsin, third of the time here in Minnesota, maybe a third of the time in, I don't know, North Dakota, it matters where they live. If they live in Minnesota, they are covered under the plan. This could get tricky for some of our employers. And so it's kind of a confusing thing, especially with remote workers and with workers who do a lot of traveling. You know, they have to perform 50% of their work here in the state of Minnesota. So because this is a bit of a confusing topic, the state will be publishing more guidance in the coming months on how this works. And they're also going to put some scenarios out there that hopefully will make it more clear. But keep in mind, you have to work 50% or more of your time in Minnesota. And if you don't work 50% of your time in Minnesota, it matters where you live. That's basically the localization test. All right. Earlier, I mentioned that the paid leave program has two distinct parts, partial wage replacement and job protection. In the state of Minnesota, we will have both in our paid leave plan. Not all states have the job protection part. Partial wage replacements allow people to get financial help while they are on leave. And the only requirement for partial wage replacement is that you must have earned 5.3% of the statewide annual average wage in the past 4 quarters, which in 2024 was about $3,700. So the barrier of entry is quite low. Almost everyone qualifies for paid leave. Another important thing to know, especially in our sector, in the utility sector, is that partial wage replacements are going to be paid out on a progressive scale. And so what that means is that lower wage earners are going to get more support. They can earn up to 90% of their usual wages with a partial wage replacement. Those of our employees who are higher wage earners are going to max out at that max quicker. And so we're going to need to decide as organizations how we're going to support them either through a short-term disability plan. So one of the things that has come up is, does paid leave replace STD or short-term disability? The answer is really no, it doesn't, but it does bring about how you as organizations want to decide upon how you're going to support your employees while they are on leave. Again, it's complicated, it's a bit confusing, and the state will continue to offer more guidance. I think the basic bottom line of what you need to understand right now is that the lower income earners are going to get more support through this paid leave law than higher wage earners. And that's just something that you want to keep in mind as you're deciding about how you want to make all these plans work together. In terms of job protection, job protections work a little bit differently. An employee who has taken a family or medical leave is required to go back to the same or similar position in the company with the same pay, benefits, status, length of service, and seniority as before they went out on leave. The difference between partial wage replacement and job protection is that job protection is based on tenure. Job protections for employees begin after 90 days of the date of hire, whereas partial wage replacement has an earnings component, job protections has a tenure component. So that is the basic overview of the core components of paid leave. What I'd like to spend some time now talking about is what are our roles and responsibilities as employers. And I'm going back to this timeline because I want to look at spring 2025 and moving forward. Most of our employees are going to learn about, they're going to see what they see on the news. They're going to read what they read in the papers that they consume. But most of our employees are going to learn about the paid leave program from us, their employers. And so it's really important that we understand what the components of the program are, and then the key deadlines, the key dates that we need to keep in mind as we get closer to implementation. So spring of 2025 is what I want to focus in on now. That is when, in any day now, we should be getting the final rules of the leave law. And also we can begin to look at alternate plans if we choose as organizations to do that. I think the reason why, as employers, we might want to look at an alternate plan through an insurer is that they would handle all of the leave administration, which when you are talking about FMLA and earned sick and safe time and short-term disability and paid leave, they would coordinate all of those benefits for us as employers, for those of us that are in HR. So I think that's one of the reasons why you may want to look outside of the state, but you certainly can utilize the state's program as well. It's really up to you, and those are decision points that as organizations you're going to need to be making in the next couple of months. 12/1, that is the deadline for notifying your employees of the paid leave law. And that's just a date you might want to put on your calendar. We'll talk more about it in a few minutes here, but the state will give us sample notifications and posters and those kinds of things. On January 1st, payroll deductions begin and the benefits start. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about personally from my perspective here is how I'm going to do year-end payroll, because the way our payroll works is it's going to go over 25 into 26. And I'm thinking about how I might implement that. I might decide to do a special payroll run so I can divide 2025 and 2026 and keep the cut clean. So those are, again, are discussions you may want to be having in your organizations about what that looks like for you and how you want to handle employee and employer contributions and employee deductions. And then finally, on April 30th of 2026, your first premiums will be due to the state. All right. I want to take a couple minutes and just talk about the private plan option because that is a part of Minnesota's law, is that we can go with a private plan. Things to keep in mind is that the plan has to be approved by the state of Minnesota. It must meet or exceed the Minnesota plan options or provisions. It must cost employees the same or less than the state plan. It must provide the same coverage for all employees, and it must apply all Minnesota paid leave protections to employees. Again, there's not a lot of guidance yet out on this from the state, and we're expecting that will come in the coming weeks. We will do our best as MMUA to keep you informed, but I will also talk about some additional resources at the end of the presentation as well. Okay, our responsibilities as employers really falls into 4 different categories. Number 1, wage reporting, payroll deduction, and premium payments. That's the number 1 responsibility. Number 2, to educate and inform our workforce. Number 3, to coordinate all of these leaves and make sure that and we're doing so appropriately. And then the 4th one is really the state is asking that we collaborate and improve once the law becomes effective, giving them feedback on how the law could be improved. So let's talk about wage reporting. To determine eligibility, employers need to report their wage data, for all of their employees. A lot of us do this already through the unemployment insurance system. We report wages on a quarterly basis. So for a lot of us, this is already being done. If you are not a part of if some of your employees are not under unemployment insurance, you will want to make sure to get accounts set up so that you can report quarterly wages for them. Again, wages are reported on a quarterly basis, and that's what they use to calculate premium, and it's also what they use to calculate benefit payment. So it's important that as those things change, that the state has that information. The reason they're using the unemployment insurance platform is that it makes it easier for us as employers because we're already reporting wages through that platform anyway. Funding PFML. Paid leave premiums typically are financed through payroll deductions on the employee wages and a contribution from the employer. The key thing to keep in mind is that employers can only deduct up to 50% of the premium from the employee. The other 50% is a contribution from us. The decision point here for your organization is really, do we want to fund 100% of the contribution for that premium? Or are we going to split it 50-50 with our employees? So that's kind of another decision-making point that you need to be starting to have those discussions in your organizations with how you're going to fund the premium part of the program. There is a benefit or a price reduction, premium reduction, excuse me, for employers with 30 or fewer employees. And this is going to be a mouthful, but employees with fewer than 30 employees with an average employee wage of less than 150% of the statewide annual average will be entitled to a reduced premium. In 2024, that wage was about $104,000. And so if you're under that, you would be, your premiums would be reduced by 50% as a small employer. Again, as I've said before, there will be additional guidance on this on the website in the coming months. There's not a whole lot out there yet, but there will be. And so I would, for those of you that this really impacts in terms of payroll deduction, payroll itself, all the things, I would highly recommend signing up for the monthly newsletters because things are changing at a pretty rapid rate. So the rate for the premium was just decided about a week and a half ago, and that rate is going to be 0.88% of employee earnings. It's a percentage of employee wages based on the prior 4 quarters, which we talked about, and it can be split by the employee and employer, or the employer can pay the entire amount of the premium depending on what they wish to do. So that's basically the rate for the insurance premium. The second role and responsibility that we have as employers is to inform our workforce. And we do that in 2 different ways. The first is to hang a workforce poster. And again, the date for doing this, the deadline is December 1st of 2025. Posters must be hung in a common or conspicuous space. A lot of times it's maybe your employee work area, your break room, wherever you hang the rest of your employee posters, this poster would go with it. And then secondly, we have to notify individuals on an individual basis. And so that must be done either 30 days after hire or 30 days before premium collection begins, which is why the deadline for December 1st for a January 1st implementation date. The state will be creating a model poster as well as notification letters that can be individualized to our particular organizations by us. And they will do that in multiple languages. Those are not out there yet on the website, but they will be as we get closer to implementation. So just a couple key dates to keep in mind. Leave administration. For an HR person, this is the part that probably gives me the most pause because it's a lot of things that are coming into play. We as employers are already balancing a lot of different things with ESST, earned sick and safe time, short-term disability, FMLA, if that applies to our organization, and now paid leave. And so there's a lot of different components that are going to all play together in terms of coordination of benefits. There is not much yet on the state website with regard to the coordination of these benefits, but they promise that there will be additional guidance. I can see this whole thing, leave administration, being an entire webinar all on its own as we get into the year here. But I wanted to just let you know that the state will be offering additional guidance as we move forward. And as they work through the details, there's a lot of details that still need to be worked through. So that is the paid leave law in a nutshell. What I'd like to do now is just to move on to some frequently asked questions. I don't know, Rita, if anyone has any questions in the chat.
There is one.
Okay.
Keith from Princeton asks, to confirm the 20-week cap is by benefit year and not every 12 months. So someone could have 40 weeks of leave if the timing is perfect.
Good question, Keith. Yes, it is by benefit year. However, that is something I'm going to take that question and pose it to the state, because I think you raise a very valid point, but it is based on benefit year. That is correct. Okay. Any other questions before I do have some frequently asked questions that are the most common that the state gets asked that I thought would be beneficial. But are there any additional questions before we launch into those? All right, so the first question, would a pregnant employee whose due date is in October 2025 be eligible for paid leave when the new program begins in 2026? The answer is yes. An employee is eligible to take a bonding leave within the first 12 months of welcoming a child by birth, adoption, or foster care placement. So for a baby born in 2025, each parent would be eligible to take 12 weeks of leave as long as that leave is completed by the child's birth date in October of 2026. So this causes, obviously, many of our employers in our membership are smaller in nature, but this kind of latent, a leave could happen in 2026 for actually the event, which happened in 2025. It's just something to think about if you have employees in this situation. Second question, will both parents be able to take a bonding leave if they work for the same employer? Yes. Up to 12 weeks of bonding leave can be taken by each parent, no matter who they work for, within 12 months of the birth, adoption, or foster care placement of the child. And so, yes, that could happen. It's probably, depending on size of the employer, that could be an issue for sure. Will an employer's premium rate increase if employees use the program? No. The rate is set for all employers on an annual basis, and it will not be based on the employee's utilization of the program. So we talked about this earlier, for 2026, the rate is 0.88%. That'll be across the board for the year. That's not to say that it might change for 2027, but it's not based on employee usage. The rate is set on an annual basis. Are municipalities and local governments required to participate? Yes, that's why we're here today. We are, as I said, it's pretty expansive, and it includes most employees and most employers throughout the state of Minnesota. So yes, we are required to participate. Can employers offer an equivalent private paid plan? We talked about this earlier. The answer is yes, as long as the plan meets or exceeds the coverage offered by the state and has been approved by the state. And we should be able to begin to apply with the state for a plan exemption beginning in the spring of 2025. Now, what that spring of 2025 means, I'm not sure. There's not guidance on the website yet about this, but it should be coming. I know that there are companies who are working with the state to get their plans approved as we speak right now. So that would be something to consider if it's of interest to you. Will the benefits be taxed? Yes. Paid leave income will be taxable income under the state law. So yes, they will. And then finally, can an employer make up the difference between partial and full wage replacement while an employee is on leave? Yes. Again, I think this is where it kind of impacts a lot of our organizations. employers are able to designate certain paid benefits like time off, vacation time, sick time as supplemental benefits, which would allow an employee to choose to receive full salary continuation while they're on their leave. What I just want to highlight here again is certain earners on the lower end of the scale are going to get up to 90% of their income in wage replacement. Those on the higher end of the scale are not. And so that's where, as organizations, we need to decide how we are going to coordinate all of these benefits for employees who are going out on leave. Finally, I want to just throw out that the highlighted at the bottom of the page here is the paidleave.mn.gov website. And that is where a lot of the information for today's presentation came from. I also pulled from some other information as well, but majority of it came from the Paid Leave website. There are a lot of additional resources out there. And one of them, you'll see that there's a tab for employers, for individuals, and for a lot of different people. If you go to the employer drop-down menu, you can get all of these things about our roles and responsibilities, a toolkit, premium rate calculation and contribution, equivalent plans. Some of them are not as built out as others. And there's a whole section on frequently asked questions. I pulled the most popular that the state has been receiving, but there's a section on that as well. I would also encourage you to sign up for the monthly newsletters. That's how I found out immediately about the 0.88 premium rate, the 0.88% premium rate. It was different prior to that, and about a week and a half ago that changed. And by getting the newsletter, it popped right into my email, and I was able to, obviously change some of what I had for this presentation. So I would just highly recommend getting on as many newsletters and updates and those kinds of things as you can. Here at MMUA, we will also try to keep you informed as we go throughout the year. Obviously, this is, one of the bigger things that we've had to implement in a really long time. And so you may get information through the weekly digest. We'll have additional webinars. I do an HR webinar on a quarterly basis. I'm going to guess that at least one, if not two more of the webinars I do this year will be on this law, and especially around the implementation of it. But if you have any ideas for us, we are always welcome to that as well. All right, a couple other key law changes that I just want to briefly mention. Effective January 1st.
Shelley,
yes.
I have one more question here.
Yep.
Before you move on, Jerome from Lake City is wondering which state agency is administering this program, Department of Labor or DEED or some other department?
Yep, DEED. So DEED is administering the program. They are working with the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, and DEED but DEED is the one who's administering the program. Good question. Thank you. Any others, as long as before we move on to our last few announcements?
Hey, Shelley.
Yes.
This is Kevin Lee at MMU.
Hi.
I just have a simple question. In regards to the leave, can the employer require the employee that's on this leave to take their own accrued leave to get up to 100% when they're gone? And the reason why I'm asking is, I don't want somebody to take this 12 weeks and then they come back and then they want to take another 4 weeks because they have leave that's still sitting on their books.
Yep.
Do you know, can the employer require that, or is that an option that the employee gets to decide?
Nope, the employer can require that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good question. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. And just based on the questions, obviously there's still a lot out there, right? And there's a lot of decision points that we as organizations have to make within our own organization as to how we're going to do this. If you have additional questions, and I'll talk about this when we leave too, send them my way. And if I don't have the answer, which I certainly am learning a lot, But I'll get it for you. And the state has been actually very helpful in trying to roll some of this stuff out. So, all right, a couple other things that I just want to make you aware of more than anything is there was a law on January 1st of 2025 where employers with more than 30 employees must disclose the starting salary range in each of their job postings. And while this might not apply to many of you, the thing that I just want to, one of the things we hear about with workforce development is competing for people. And some of our competitors may have the salary range in the job posting. And so sometimes it might be to your benefit to have the salary in the posting. Applicants may not choose to apply for the job if it's not there. So that's just something, again, to talk about within your organizations as in terms of how you want to handle that. But it only applies to employers with over 30 employees. So that's just something to keep in mind. Healthcare coverage changes this is a kind of it's an interesting one, and I think it's one that it would be important for all of us in the HR world to know, is that the coverage for wigs has been expanded. It used to be that you could get a wig if you had a condition called alopecia, is when you lose all of basically your body hair. This coverage has now been expanded to include people with healthcare conditions such as cancer who also lose their hair. And it was brought forth in a bill by Carrie Dietzick, who is a Minnesota senator who died of cancer last December. So the coverage in all of our insurance plan has expanded to include wigs. And I think that's just an important thing to know if you were ever asked the question on the benefits side of things. In other MMUA news, and wanted to let you know that at long last, the Utility Workforce Scholarship is going to be launching next week. We will be sending out a standalone message about that. The application deadline for the scholarship will be April 30th. And applicants, we will be getting out 5 $1,000 scholarships for any utility related job, meaning it could be line work, water, wastewater, gas, phone, broadband. So we've expanded who can apply for the scholarship. It's a fairly simple application, and each applicant will be required to answer 2 open-ended questions and have 2 references from either a mentor, a teacher, a boss, someone like that. Look for more information in the digest, and again, we'll send a standalone next week. Super excited about that, and I'm really excited to get it launched finally. And then I also wanted to mention our salary survey that is going to be going out at the end of March. And I just want to encourage all of you those of you who completed in the past, thank you, to encourage you to complete this. We take the information, we compile it all, and we give it back to you if for your information and use, as long as you completed the survey. If you don't complete the survey, we charge you a fee for the information, but it is useful information, and we really encourage you to take the time to complete it. So that'll be coming out at the end of March. And then finally, I've done a lot of talking today. So if you have any questions, or if you have any ideas for us or ways that we can help you in your utilities, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at my email, or that's my direct line. I'm happy to answer any questions or chase down answers if I don't have them. And lastly, I just wanted to thank you for spending some time with us today. This is a big deal, and we know a lot, but there's a lot more to come. And so I just wanted to thank you for your time today, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.